Hi everybody. We are going to start to switch gears and learn about theme and how it's different from a main idea of a book, and thinking about how if you have a theme of a book, it means that you really understand the setting, the character, and the plot. When you put all those elements of your story together, you come up with a theme. And sometimes it's called the author's purpose. Goes under different terms, but what it basically means is that you're having a conversation with an author as you're reading, and you're trying to understand what is it the author wants us to learn from the book he or she wrote. It's like a hidden message, like finding a mystery. And when we gather all these themes together, it helps all of us to could make it build a better world. It could help us be a better citizen based on what that message is, or that theme is that we are getting from the story we're reading. So we just finished the BFG. And sometimes if you are trying to figure out the purpose, the theme, maybe you want to think about what the character got out of the book, what they learned. So when we think about the BFG, he was a scary giant. Sophie thought, wow, he's really scary. And if she judged him simply by how he looked, which she did at first, she thought, oh my goodness, he's going to eat me, and that's going to be the end of me. But as she got to know him more, she realized, you know what? He is a friendly giant. But had she not taken the time to get to know him a little bit, she would never have known that. So when you think about trust and friendship, they matter. And so Sophie trusted the BFG, and the BFG trusted Sophie. So they were able to see a problem and work together. Because they didn't communicate the same way, they were able to understand the differences in each other, go to the queen with the problem, and they found a solution to the problem. So when we're thinking about theme, it's digging deeper into how those ideas in the book we can put in our everyday life. And the main idea of a story is the basic main idea that the BFG, was using his time to do nice things for children, and the other giants were going and eating people. So the main idea of the book was how the BFG was going to get back at the bad giants, I guess we could say. But theme is something we can take away, and we can learn from, and we can put into our everyday lives. So there's a big difference between a theme and a main idea. So when you think of don't judge a book by its cover, you may hear that a lot. Sophie didn't do that, and she was able to understand the BFG. So we're going to be using two books. We're going to be working with the Wump World. This book is by Bill Peet. Really great book. You can see it's gotten a lot of love in reading. And we're also going to be looking at The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. You might know this book. I'm sure you do. Pretty sure many of you aren't too familiar with this book, which is great. I like when that happens. I like to introduce new books. So I'm going to read you the Wump World today. And today and tomorrow you'll be dealing with the Wump World. And then really not today. Today's Sunday. On Monday and Tuesday you're going to work with the Wump World. And on Wednesday and Thursday I'm going to probably be working with the Lorax, and sort of seeing how that idea of the same theme can cover multiple books. So we can almost take a bunch of books that are similar in theme and put in a basket together. These two would fit in a basket, along with the Great Kapok Tree. They would fit in a basket together. So think about that. Why would I collect those three books and stick them in a basket together? So today I'm going to read you The Wump World by Bill Peet. And just to give you an idea, this book has a copyright date of 1970. This book's older than me when it was copyrighted, not this exact book. So I'm going to try and find a way to pretend we're in the classroom and see if I can make this happen. Pretend you're all sitting in front of me. The Wump World. The Wump World was a small world, very much smaller than our world. There were no great oceans, lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump World was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees, with a few winding rivers and lakes, but it was perfect for the Wumps. They were the only creatures living there. The Wumps were simple grass eaters and spent most of their time grazing on the tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal clear rivers and lakes, and at night they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased with nothing whatever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have worried if they had known that someone 1,000,000 miles away was watching their little world. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for the earth came a giant flock of pot-bellied monsters, with tails and fins, spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like gaping mouths, doors flew open. Then ramps shot to the ground, and down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out onto the meadow. These were the Pollutions from the planet Pollutus. They had left their worn-out old planet to start a new life in the new world. After such a long journey, the Pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost Pollution and world chief, across the meadow. At the top of a hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. Finally, he said, "Looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get things going." What do you notice here? Girls and boys, always important, use the illustrations to help see, maybe predict what you think's going to happen. One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines thundering out of the yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out onto the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching warily from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. Who wouldn't be horrified? They were just happy little Wumps in their little Wump World. "Wump, Wump," they cried, and in a wild-eyed panic, they went humpity-clumping off through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. Then down they tumbled head over heels through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in dark caverns, while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high above. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to bits. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon the entire Wump World was overrun. Overrun means everything. The machines had taken it over. Oh, this picture makes me sad. The busy little pollutants kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. Why do you think they left their old world? Suddenly, great cities sprang up, huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall office buildings. And above them all loomed the 100-story skyscrapers. Along with the buildings came a tangle of streets and freeways, with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes rushing pell-mell in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. See those highways? Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on the fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges and the mushrooms clustered in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down here. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screeching coming from above. and it was growing noisier by the day. Oh boy. There was more and more noise and more of everything. More buildings with more smokestacks puffing more and more smoke. More freeways with more traffic shooting out more and more clouds of exhaust. More trash and more trash piles with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Pretty soon, the city was so clouded by the factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways, the pollutions could barely breathe. Well, it's their own fault, right? They created that air. They went sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in. Maybe they should get a mirror, blame themselves. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the world chief. When the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once. We can't breathe the air, we can't drink the water, and we can't stand the noise. We've had enough. Achoo, sneezed the chief. I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once, I promise. With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 top outer spacemen. Gentlemen, he said, this world of ours has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick. But first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, man, so get going. Righto, chief, barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then zaroosh, zaroosh, zaroosh. The men took off in 3 different directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. Look at, is this the kind of stuff we want coming out of our planes? Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. Blast it all, he bellowed. What's keeping those blithering bubbleheads? Then, one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky, swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the men hopped out shouting, I've done it, I've done it. I found a new world, a bigger and better world. Nice going, lad, cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport, gave their hero one great rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. That's one day, right? You remember that. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the space center and crowded aboard the giant spacecrafts. After double-checking to make sure all the pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blastoff. With a thunderous roar, the giant ships shot off the ground. Kazoom! Up and away through the smoke-blackened sky, they were gone. And at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump World. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, and so they remained in their caverns with ears cocked for the slightest sound. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go, and led by the biggest Wump, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. Then one by one, the Wumps waddled out onto the freeway and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful was happening to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings with walls and walls of windows looming up on every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone. And the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles only to find more and more buildings. with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave when the biggest Wump let out a joyful Wump. I wonder what they could have been joyful in all of this. What could they have found? Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees. All that was left of their lovely world. Wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out onto the meadow. Pretty soon the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. In time, the murky skies would clear up, and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the Wump World would never be quite the same. So, girls and boys, as I read this story, it's kind of a little bit similar to some of the things we're living today. Our world is becoming cleaner because so many people are staying home. So when we think about stories, now this was written, I told you, in 1970, a lot of it can relate to things we're doing today. So when we think about the pollutions and what they did, why do you think they left? Why did they come? It kind of creates a circle. So today you're just going to jot down some thoughts you have after listening to the story. Just sort of, what are you thinking? What are you wondering? And we will continue to think about how when you put the setting, the characters, and the plot together, we find that theme, we find that message that goes directly to us, and we can pass it on to others, and it can sort of maybe better our world by having that conversation with Bill Peet. What did he want us to get out of it? What is he trying to tell us? It's just like following directions. If you follow the directions or the recipe, you come out with a good outcome. So authors are doing the same thing. There's a message in here, something we all can learn and think about. So today you're just going to put down some thoughts you have and maybe think about what might that message be today. What is the theme? Not the main idea. The main idea is a little bit of retelling what happened in the story, but what's that deeper piece? So I'll see you next time when we'll continue our theme conversation and listen to the Lorax. Happy reading!